Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and I'm going to tell you about flight testing the Boeing 777. Now, the Boeing 777 is one of my all-time favorite aircraft. Got about 8,000 hours on it, flew it for the last 13 years of my career, flew it on my final flight, and was a line check airman on it, and just thoroughly enjoyed the aircraft. But back when I got a chance to fly it for the first time, I was a 727 captain, so you can imagine going from flying a 727 to flying the Boeing 777, especially for you Boeing 777 pilots out there. It's quite a leap in airplanes, both in capability and size. But the aspect of me getting to fly it back in December 18th of 1994 had a rather interesting history because I mentioned on at other times that ALPA and Boeing did not have a good relationship. There were some political issues back before my time, basically, where ALPA had become persona non grata on Boeing territory. In fact, the very first meeting that we had that I was involved in, I wasn't chairman of the committee at the time, but it was kind of secret because if some of the higher ups found out that ALPA was on Boeing property, it would not go well. So some managers took quite a risk to kind of reopen the channels. But we went along, it was going well. And Boeing told me they were going to offer me an opportunity to fly the 777. Okay, well, I'm waiting patiently to do this. I'm not going to push them. I don't want to, stir the pot, cause any trouble. It's nice enough they're going to let, our committee get an evaluation of the aircraft. But kind of a funny thing happened. I got a call from Boeing and says, "Hey, we got this flight. We've got three British Airways pilots who are going to fly the aircraft, and why don't you come along? We'll let you go along, and maybe if we're lucky, you might get a little bit of stick time right at the end of it." And well, I was happy to get what I could get. I didn't want to push it, but I happened to be in the training center, and I mentioned to the head of the 777 training program at the time at United that Boeing had offered me to fly. I might get to fly once the British airline people were done. And Steve Fort, who was the head of the program at the time, he later became our vice president of flight operations. And Steve is a remarkable, hardworking, smart guy. And he looked at me and he says, "We're the launch customer." He says, "That's not right. We're the launch customer. You should be the first one, or us, somebody at United should be the first one to fly this airplane." He says, "I'm going to make a phone call." And that was Friday. Well, Monday, I get a call from Boeing and says, "Well, there's been a little reshuffling of plans." And I go, "Oh, what?" And they said, "Well, you're going to fly it first, and you will fly it as much as you want to fly it. And if we have time, the British ALPA people will get British Airlines people will get a chance to fly it." So I go, "Oh, okay, that sounds good." Well, we ended up having a little bit over a 5-hour flight, and I got to do a lot of stuff. But like I said before, I had an involvement with flight tests from the aircraft, even from Boeing at the time. But it was a military side at Wichita, and of course I was chairman of the ALPA National New Aircraft Committee. And once I started writing these flight evaluations and publishing them, the whole thing opened up. Now, if you've been following my series, I'm doing these in order, and the last one I just did was a flight evaluation of the Saab 2000. Well, here is John Cashman, and John Cashman is a remarkable individual. He has an office full of books and material, and if you ask him a question, he can either answer it off the cuff or he can go right to his bookshelf and pull that piece of information right out and show it to you. And I've never heard of anybody who or seen anybody who had that encyclopedic sort of knowledge. And here's me flying the aircraft for the first time, and this is a flight test aircraft. You can see by some of the instrumentation up there. And yeah, I started out, and I'm attaching the report here in a PDF file so you can read the whole thing. But John goes way back, of course, with Boeing. He's been retired now. They actually brought him back when the 787 had a few issues, but he retired up in Maine, and just a super nice guy. But we got talking about the 727, and the old thing was, well, you had to check and roll. You know, you had to come in, you had to do a little check where you stop the descent rate, and then you roll it on. And as you do, the center of gravity's up here, the gear's back here. As you roll it on, you're actually bringing the wheels up while the airplane's coming down. You get a nice smooth landing. And I said, I said to John, I said, you can land it. You know, they say that's how you got to do it. But I said, you can land it just like any other airplane. You can come in and you can do a nice flare. I don't care if it's flaps 40 or whatever. You can do a nice flare and get a nice touchdown. And John just looked at me and said, "Where's your touchdown point?" And that's the point. You get your best performance, and I'm digressing here, okay? You get your best performance by doing the check and roll, and if you want to take the time to flare it, yeah, it's going to put you farther down the runway, but if you got a real long runway, you can play with it. But anyway, okay, we're getting the flight here. And here is the group there, me and the British Airways pilots, and their names are in the report there. Very very involved with airline investigation and stuff like that. But that's kind of a big engine there. I can raise my hand up over my head, and I still had 17 inches before I could touch the top of that. And they always talked, how big is the 777 engine? Well, it's about the size of a 737 fuselage, so that's a big engine. And I'll tell you what, those tires are pretty good size too. And there's 3 of them on each side, total of 6. That whole main gear assembly weighs around 10,000 pounds. So when you're picking up that gear with the hydraulics, you're raising essentially 2 pickup trucks. So 4 pickup trucks, one on each side, and that's a lot of weight. So you got to have some pretty good pumps, and the system does have that. They have air demand pumps, and they really put out the hydraulic pressure to get the gear up. That's a lot of weight. And take a look at that flap setting behind the head there. That's coming down pretty good. And another picture here now. Of course, they can't just necessarily keep a bunch of 777s for flight test and then scrap them. They use the aircraft. There's an agreement with the purchasing airlines that the aircraft are going on to service. And I actually flew this model. I flew WA001, the original prototype, on the original flight test. And this aircraft went to United Airlines, and I would look down there at the nose number and mention to my co-pilot, I've stalled this aircraft. And they'd kind of look at me like, what? And I said, yeah, I've stalled this. And they go, well, you mean you inadvertently, because you wouldn't do it on purpose, of course, you mean you inadvertently got the stick shaker? And I said, no, we went way past that. Stick shaker isn't a stall. That's just your artificial warning. We went right into the stall buffet. And boy, this thing really has a bucking tendency. And if you're in the back, which I was when I watched the other people do it, you can watch the wings come up, because the center section loses lift first, because you want to keep the ailerons flying. So as that center section loses lift, the load is transferred out and the wings come up nicely. It's quite interesting to watch, and it's quite a very interesting bucking motion. But I would explain to my co-pilots, no, I'm not absolutely a crazy nut here. I didn't do it with passengers on board. And I said, I also did touch and goes and things like that, V1 cuts. But that's the fun of flight test. You get stuff. You get to do stuff you don't normally do. And I'll tell you, as you probably know, the airplane, especially on V1 cuts and things like that, it is so much easier to fly than the simulators. They especially make the simulators hard, I think, because if you can fly a V1 cut engine failure, in the simulator, you can certainly handle it in the aircraft. So here I am again. I made the cover of the Airline Pilots Association magazine back when this came out, and I'm slipping there. I'm not number 1. No, I'm not number 2 even. 3, 4, 5. I'm story number 5. Well, that's probably because it's a little bit longer. I have no idea, but maybe the shine is off the pumpkin here, and I'm moving down. But anyway, I've got good coverage in the magazine. I'm just kind of joking there about that. So I got the article published, and one thing that's kind of interesting about this, and if you're interested, you can read it in the attachment. But we had established a good relationship with Boeing now by this time, and we had been working with them for quite a long time. And one of the things we did was we had quite a discussion with them about the use of the thrust asymmetry compensation system, tax system, they called it. If you lose an engine, the airplane automatically puts in rudder. That assists you in maintaining control. And we had a discussion with them. We go, that's a nice system. We want that. That's a real good system. Now, the 777, like a lot of aircraft of this era, were getting a lot of nice enhancements and things that in the past you would have to do manually, like deploying the ram air turbine to give you backup hydraulics and electrics. This occurred automatically. Like if both engines failed, boy, it's coming down. If all three hydraulic systems are at low pressure, or if the main and backup electrical power is lost in flight, it comes down. And one of the things about the electrical architecture on this aircraft is you had so many backup generators. Well, they're going for ETOPS out of the box, and you saw that little blue thing up here kind of discuss it. This was a concurrent thing that was being worked mainly by the Airworthiness and Performance Committee, which I later chaired. Then we took my new aircraft committee and combined it with the Airworthiness Performance, and it was the Airworthiness Performance Evaluation and Certification Committee. So we combined those two committees. But basically, the systems would come on automatically, and if you lost the main and backup power, the APU would start automatically. Didn't depend where you had the APU switch. If you were losing power, it's going to help you. All this stuff is going to come on manually. And one thing that a lot of people may not appreciate was in the early years, the liquid crystal displays were not that great. A lot of the CRTs, especially when I flew the Airbus, they had sometimes replaced the engine CRT into the attitude indicator slot. That's switch them there, and you could notice a little burn-in of the engine parameters on your attitude indicator, which is kind of unnerving. Why is that? But that was a little problem with the cathode ray tubes. The LCDs, they had this off-axis viewing issue where you couldn't read your co-pilots, or the co-pilot couldn't read the captain's instruments at a 45-degree angle, and that I discussed earlier, where we went to Honeywell and we're working with engineers who don't understand how people fly airplanes. And he goes, well, you got your own instruments. And I go, no, I need to see his too. And they didn't quite understand that, but we got that problem fixed. So they could be viewed, and also got a little softer on the display, so they weren't as hard on it. And one thing on the Airbus discussions, the laws going to alternate, direct law, and all these various laws gets fairly complicated. As I was flying above Flight Level 250, there's a little switch that's called PFDs over the captain's head, and you can just switch that off, and it switches off the flight control computers. And basically what it does is it makes it fly just like a 67. You're in what's called direct mode, and it takes out all the flight control computers, but basically you don't have the envelope protections, because if you go over 30 degrees of bank, the little attitude indicator symbol goes amber, and I think it's 35 degrees, it jerks it back there, kind of like an instructor coming on and saying, hey, you're overdoing it, take it back. And it also there's also the aspects of, you have low slung engines, as you can see in the picture. So typically when you add power, that thrust being below the center of gravity pitches the nose up, and when you take power off, it comes back. Well, okay, they kind of wash that out. The flight controls will take that out, but if you don't have the flight control computers on, then it acts more like an airplane does to the pitch and power relationships. The other thing that it gives you that the Airbus doesn't have, the Airbus maintains a pitch attitude. So you can pull the power back and you stay right there, and it slows. And you don't have what's known as speed stability, which is when you pull the power back normally in most airplanes, as you slow, you've got to pull more pressure back on the yoke to maintain altitude, where the Airbus will just set their level and the speed will just bleed off. It wants to hunt for the speed that you have trimmed, so the nose will drop. So if you want to maintain altitude, you have to pull. Same thing, add power, you have to push. So it gives you what would be normal indications of speed stability that could be lost in the flight control system, which is a very nice aspect of the way the airplane flies. The 777 is a fly-by-wire aircraft, but if you didn't tell somebody that, they would just think it was a very nice flying airplane with a lot of good characteristics, and they probably wouldn't even notice that some of the bad characteristics had been washed out, as we say. Now, the aircraft has certain stall protection features. We did clean stalls, and we also did stalls in the landing configuration. And I'm starting to slow the airplane. We're coming through 174 knots. And normally at that time, you're hitting the yellow band, the caution band. And what happens is the auto throttles automatically come in to protect the speed. They're going, hey, you don't want to do this. You don't want to slow down. We're coming in. Oh, and a nice thing. The auto throttles move, so you can see them move, and you can see the response, not like the Airbus where they're in fixed detent. So these auto throttles move, and that's nice. And also the yokes move, they're coupled, they're together, and you get the full response. In fact, I'll talk about this on the flying the 777-300 version, but Frank Santoni was the chief test pilot on that, and they've got one of the Airbus guys in the cockpit at probably the Paris Air Show or something. I forget the exact event. And Frank says to the Airbus test pilot, says, hey, I want to show you something. And the guy said, he tells the Airbus test pilot to put his head right over the yoke, put his ear right over the yoke there. And the guy goes, okay. And Frank goes, boom, like that, hits him in the ear. And he says, what's that? And he says, well, that's something you can't do in the Airbus. I can put in a control, and I get a response, and you don't do it in the Airbus. You have no idea what the guy's putting in there. I thought that was a kind of a humorous little story. But anyway, as you're slowing down, the throttles come in to protect it while you disable that, because we're going to do stalls. And then you stop. You lose the ability to trim into the stall because you don't want to trim in the deep stall. So you're getting the forces are increasing. So yeah, if you want to stall, you're going to have to pull. And as we started to get into the stall, the stick forces increased dramatically. So yeah, if you want to hold in the stall, it's going to take a lot. So now we configured for approach to landing stalls, and we had a VREF, which would be our normal, of course, approach speed of 135 knots for our weight. And as I approached the stall, the trim was inhibited at 112 knots, and I was having to do a 22-pound pull on the yoke. The stick shaker went off at 110 knots, and I was holding 26 pounds of force. And we kept slow. And at 105 knots, I encountered moderate stall buffet, and I had to hold 55 pounds of force. So, okay, it will let you stall. It will let you overspeed. It will let you overbank. You can do all these things, but there are protections that come in that kind of say, hey, that's not a good idea. So I had to exert 60 pounds at 99 knots. And 69 pounds at 97 knots. And see, it's ramping up pretty quickly here. To hold the aircraft in the stall, I had to pull with 90 pounds of force. So yeah, it was quite interesting. And John Cashman said that when they were first doing the 30-degree full flap stalls, it approached the stalls, it would develop a side slip and roll off rapidly on a wing. Well, that's not the stall characteristics you want. That's why they do flight test. So they had to adjust the inboard slat position, and that took care of the problem. Now, there's our later to become a United Airlines aircraft. They're doing water ingestion tests on the engines, and they did this out at Edwards. And when I would typically do, when I was based at Edwards, maintenance test flights on Saturdays. So I'm doing T-38 maintenance test flights, and they were having the airliners come out because we had less activity. And if you can see a little white thing down there, they set up a little trough and they flood it with water because you don't get a lot of water in the desert, so you have to bring your own in. And they fill it, and then they run the aircraft through it. They get the spray to see if they're dousing the engines. And here's another interesting test, not one that I've ever done because I wasn't in a position to do this, but it's called the VMU, the minimum unstick speed. And this speed is used for a lot of calculations aerodynamically and performance. But what they do is they take a big railroad tie made out of oak and they attach it to the tail because you don't want to scrape the hell out of the tail. So you put this piece of oak there and then basically because the aircraft won't lift off typically until you get the tail on the ground, and then you can get to a pitch attitude where it will lift off at a very low airspeed. Of course, this is something you would never want to do in for an operational reason unless you were trying to avoid hitting an aircraft on the runway, something like that. But I was told that this is an extremely difficult test to do because the airplane just wants to fly off before you can get the tail there, and it wants to too easily fly off. So you really have to work yourself into the test. And another interesting test, of course, is the RTOs, the maximum brake energy test. And these are carbon brakes, which are very powerful. I always caution people, when I'm sitting in the back, we're slowly taxiing into the gate. Now, I have only on one occasion, but I had to stomp on the brakes because a little baggage cart was coming under the nose, and I would run over the driver. These multi-disc brakes, they're not like your brakes. They're not even like the brakes on my Corvette, my Z06. These things will essentially stop you in an instant. If you're only going 10 miles an hour, these things will stop you instantly. And if anybody's with their lap belts off, they are going to go flying. So until that aircraft comes to the gate and stops, keep that lap belt on, because if the captain has to make an emergency stop, you're going to go flying into the seat. But anyway, they would do these tests, these maximum brake tests. They would do these on Saturdays, and it wasn't uncommon. And I digress. It wasn't uncommon doing these tests to blow tires. So the airplane would be disabled, and half the runway at Edwards would be closed from the center taxiway one direction to the other. And I was told, well, that's all fine. Just take off and go the opposite direction. But don't go into afterburner while the airplane's up on jacks. They don't like that. So I would start rolling and get some speed and then finally go to burner if I needed it. And landing was fun because I'd be coming in and there would be like, one time there was a big L-1011 sitting in the middle of the runway on jacks, and I got 8,000 feet to land in, so that's fine, in a T-38, and I come in and land and I can turn off. But it just looks weird flying an approach to a runway where a big airplane, and for me flying 38s, that was a L-1011's a big airplane, was sitting there in the middle of the runway. But anyway, they'd do these tests, they'd come to a stop, and they would have to wait several minutes before the fire company could come in and start the cooling fans or that. And this was always a worry because if the temperature gets too hot, that center axle and gear system can be damaged and essentially ruined. So that's a lot of money there. And of course, you have the danger of possible fires. You see that smoke and everything. These suckers get hot. You have the possible danger of fire. And I had a lot of work with Boeing on this, and we had a very good relationship. It's when I started, our relationship was poor, and while I was chairman, we maintained a very good relationship. Of course, I was off of it by the time the reverse merger came in, and now I hear that ALPA does not have a good relationship with Boeing. Of course, I don't think anybody right now has a good relationship with Boeing with all the problems they've been experiencing. But it was very unfortunate to hear because our involvement with them was very productive, I think, for both sides. And when I'll talk about the next time I did a test flight on the 777 with my committee, we discovered a few things in the flight controls and also the air-ground mode systems that Boeing had not until that time discovered. And it was funny. I would get calls, the weird things would happen on the test flight that we didn't quite understand. Of course, they've got all these parameters being recorded. They could go back, they look at the data, and I would get a call from John Cashman saying, hey, this is what happened. And I go, oh, that's interesting. Oh, and the nice thing about it, I mean, we had such a good relationship. I had John Cashman's personal cell phone number in my phone, and I could call him directly at any time, and we had a really good relationship, and that was nice. And of course, I get from the the vice president of development and liaison here, Chet, I get a nice letter thanking me for the work that my committee had done. And I chaired a ALPA panel at the national symposium, and they had this little 777 there because we had the Boeing there and also Airbus, and they had this nice little model, and this nameplate was covered up, and I completed the presentation, and Chet Extrand says, "Well, not so fast. We got something here for you," and he brought the model up, and this is a very beautiful model. It's downstairs in my family room. And he took the little tag off, and he showed me that it was dedicated to me for, I was the team leader on the Working Together program. I headed a number of our members on the committee. And there is a totally unreadable picture of the Collier Trophy. I guess, the big Collier Trophy's in the Air and Space Museum, but if you win it, if you're one of the winners, and Boeing won it one year for the 777, if you're one of the winners, you get a mini trophy, and then everybody who was involved in the company or otherwise can get their name on it, and in the upper right-hand corner is my name there. So one other aspect I'd like to mention is when I was ending up my chairmanship of the new aircraft committee, John Cashman offered me a flight on the Boeing 247, which had been restored by a bunch of mechanics at Boeing. This one's now in the Seattle Museum there. It's had its final flight, but I got a chance to fly it. And this was a 1933 airplane. And it raised the question of, it had a capacity of 10 people. Would 10 people ever want to go to the same place at the same time? Well, that question has been answered. Anyway, I absolutely love this airplane. I flew it all over the world. I had just a absolute enjoyable time flying it. It is one of the nicest flying airplanes I've ever flown. And you can get some beautiful landings in the airplane. So to conclude this part of the story, this is my final takeoff out of Maui. I got a water cannon salute because I was arriving into Chicago at 4 in the morning, and if you had a water cannon salute there, you wouldn't be able to see it because it was dark. So my son, the oldest son who's an airline pilot, arranged this. So I got a water cannon salute out of Maui when I took off August 10th, 2015. My birthday is August 12th, and they make you fly your last trip that ends just a couple days before, because once you turn 65, now it used to be 60, but once you turn 65, you are an absolute punkin', and you cannot be in command of commercial aircraft. So I had to make sure that, hey, if we had any maintenance delays, that I could still fly the airplane with a little bit of pad. So I'm taking off. I'm getting the water cannon salute here. It just produced an absolutely beautiful picture, and I do my final flight to Chicago. I land at 4 in the morning. Very quiet terminal at that time. I park the aircraft, say goodbye to my crew, tell them that, if I try to come in the cockpit a week from now, somebody will probably shoot me. And I waited till ground power was connected, turned off the APU, and that was the final time I walked out of the cockpit as a captain of United Airlines. So thoroughly had an enjoyable career, and I really relished my involvement with the development of this aircraft. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.